Ash fell like slow, dirty snow, catching in the folds of cloaks and the grooves of armor, turning Coruscant's evening into something older than its towers. The city's lights still burned, stubborn as 1,000 hearths, but the sky above the temple district had taken on a bruised cast, as if the heavens themselves had been struck and were deciding whether to bleed. Malgus walked without haste. He never hurried for anyone, not for the Dark Council, not for the Empire's fleet hanging unseen beyond the cloud layer, not even for the war that had gnawed at the Republic for decades until its bones showed through its shining skin. The processional way stretched before him, a broad ceremonial avenue meant for parades and peaceful pilgrimages. Tonight it belonged to shadows. Beside him, Elena moved with the quiet obedience of someone trained from childhood to vanish in plain sight. Her hood was up, her face half in darkness, yet Malgus could feel her presence like a warmth at his side, dangerously human, dangerously soft, an ember he had refused to extinguish. She carried no visible weapon. She did not need one. Her use was not in killing. It was in being the kind of truth Malgus never permitted the Empire to see. Ahead, Republic soldiers stood guard before the temple's outer approaches. They wore their discipline like polished metal, but even polished metal could warp under heat. The men and women at the barricade had the look of those assigned to watch a sacred place, while its true defenders were elsewhere, off fighting, off negotiating, off dying at the edges of the galaxy where the holocams did not linger. They didn't know that their planet's defenses had been turned to silence. Somewhere in the depths of Coruscant systems, codes had been spoken and keys had turned. Somewhere, a mercenary with iron in her blood had stepped through an exposed hatch and made a gesture that would be remembered as a hinge in history. The barricade's commander lifted a hand. Halt. Duh. Identify. Malgus did not answer. He could have. He could have invented a name, a station, a purpose. It would have been insultingly easy. Instead, he let the force roll from him like a low thunder, not a shout but a pressure, a certainty. The soldiers' knees softened. Their breath caught. Their eyes widened, pupils shrinking as if a predator had stepped into their firelight. Move, he said, and it was not a request. 2 troopers tried. Their hands went to their rifles, their training clawing back through fear. Malgus's lightsaber snapped alive with a sound like a blade pulled from a wet sheath. The red glow painted the nearest helmets the color of fresh wounds. He cut once, clean and economical. Armor parted, a body folded. The second trooper fired a burst that scorched the stone near Malgus's feet. Malgus turned, caught the rifle barrel in a gauntleted hand, and crushed it as though it were bone. He lifted the trooper by the throat and held him there long enough for the others to understand the lesson. "This is Coruscant," Malgus said softly, and he could hear the surprise in their minds. This wasn't some border world they could burn and forget. This was the heart. You were raised to believe it cannot fall. He let the trooper drop. The man landed hard, coughing, alive. Mercy could be a knife as sharp as any other. It cut pride, it cut hope, it cut the story people told themselves about who was winning. Elena stepped forward, and for a moment, Malgus felt the faint tremor of her fear. Less for herself than for what he was about to do. She had seen him kill. She had seen him plan deaths by the thousands, with the calm of a man arranging furniture. But she had also seen him stare into the night after battle, as if waiting for something he could never name to finally arrive. They passed through the broken line of guards and moved on. The temple rose before them, ancient against the sky, a mountain of stone reverence embedded in a city of durasteel and noise. Its windows glowed with warm light. There were still Jedi inside, still Padawans, still archivists who believed that knowledge could outlast hatred. Malgus could taste the force there, bright, disciplined, layered like hymn singing. It made his teeth ache. It made his heart, that stubborn muscle, remember what it had once been before rage became prayer. "You don't have to do this," Elena murmured, so low it could have been mistaken for the wind. Malgus did not look at her. "Yes," he said. "I do. Because if Coruscant could be humbled, then the Republic could be broken. And if the Republic could be broken, then the galaxy would finally stop pretending it was civilized." He took the first step up toward the temple doors, and the air seemed to tighten around him, as if the city itself had drawn breath to scream. The temple's interior was not silent. It had never been silent. There were always footsteps, whispered lessons, the soft drone of meditation chambers, the turning of pages in the archives like leaves in a wind. Tonight the sound was war, boots hammering stone, sabers snapping on, voices raised in alarm and prayer. Malgus entered as if he belonged there. The first Jedi he saw were young, Padawans with braided hair and too thin shoulders, their eyes huge with terror, their hands shaking as they tried to remember the forms drilled into them. They moved to block him, blue and green blades lifting like a forest of fragile light. Malgus swept his saber in a low arc. The force surged. Two were thrown hard against a column. Another stumbled, breath knocked out, and Elena's hand shot out instinctively as if she could catch him before he hit the floor. Malgus did not slow. "Back!" a commanding voice rang out. "Fall back to the inner hall." A line of Jedi Knights formed, older, steadier. At their center stood Ven, a man carved from resolve. His robes were plain, but his presence was not. He carried the Force like a banner held high in both hands, unyielding. His blue blade hummed with the calm certainty of someone who had spent his life believing that light was not only a weapon, but a law. Malgus felt a flicker of recognition, not personal, not intimate, but the recognition of an enemy who had built himself well. The Jedi had had centuries to refine their order into an instrument of control disguised as peace. Ven was one of their finest notes. "You," Ven said, and his eyes flicked to the red blade. "You have no place here." Malgus laughed, a short sound without humor. "Every place is mine," he said. "In time." Behind them, the temple shuddered. The great doorway at the far end buckled inward as if struck by a god's fist. A vessel, ugly Republic-made stolen, drove through stone and durasteel with a scream of tearing metal. Dust billowed. The hatch blew open. 50 Sith warriors spilled out like wolves released into a feast hall. They wore armor that made them look less like soldiers than like something from old nightmares, their helmets faceless, their sabers igniting an angry red. Imperial troopers followed, blasters raised, their faces set with the hard calm of people who had been told the enemy was not merely hostile, but heretical. The knights met them in a crash of light and sound. Blue and green clashed with red. The Force snapped through the air, pushes, pulls, lightning crackling from fingertips, stones lifting and shattering. Malgus stepped forward into the chaos as if it were an ocean he had always known how to swim. Elena stayed close behind him, darting between cover, her eyes tracking threats. She was not trained to fight Jedi. That was the point. She was trained to survive Sith. Ven came at Malgus with precision rather than rage. His blade angled to disarm, not butcher. Malgus parried and pressed, savoring the difference. The Jedi fought like men who believed their restraint made them superior. Sith restraint was a myth. Sith restraint was hunger held at the edge of a knife until the moment came to plunge. "You're slaughtering children," Ven snarled as Malgus drove him back toward a broken statue of some long-dead master. "They would have grown," Malgus replied, and his voice was almost conversational. "Into you." Ven's jaw tightened. He moved into a high strike meant to split Malgus's guard. Malgus caught it and shoved, the Force behind it like a battering ram. Ven skidded across the floor, boots scraping sparks from inlaid metal. In the periphery, Malgus glimpsed Padawans scrambling, trying to drag wounded knights away. A boy with a green saber, barely more than a child, lunged at a Sith warrior and was cut down with terrifying ease. Blood sprayed across white stone, bright as spilled paint. For a moment, something in Malgus's chest tightened. Not guilt, not sorrow. Something older and more dangerous. Memory. He had been a child once too. He had bled. He had been taught that pain was a teacher, that compassion was weakness, that the galaxy could be ruled if one simply embraced what others feared in themselves. Elena saw his hesitation, however brief. Her breath caught. She knew him well enough to sense the places in him that still resisted becoming a machine. Malgus turned that resistance into fuel. He struck Ven again and again, forcing him backward. The temple around them seemed to protest, the air humming with disapproval, the walls vibrating with the ancient weight of belief. Malgus welcomed it. Let the temple hate him. Let the Force scream. Ven met him blow for blow until his arms trembled. His eyes narrowed. "You can't hold this," Ven said, voice strained with effort. "Even if you break us here, you can't." Malgus slammed his boot into Ven's knee. The joint buckled. Ven dropped, one hand bracing against the floor, and Malgus's blade hovered at his throat, red light reflecting in Ven's eyes. "You think this place is the heart of the Republic," Malgus said quietly. "You think it's sacred. It's a symbol. Symbols burn." Ven's gaze did not waver. "Then you'll burn with it." Malgus hesitated just long enough for Elena to whisper, trembling, "Malgus." He looked past Ven, deeper into the temple where the archives lay, where knowledge was stored like grain in a silo, where the Republic's story was written down so it could be repeated. Malgus understood stories. He understood their power. He understood that to conquer Coruscant, he needed more than ships and soldiers. He needed to rewrite memory. He brought his saber down. Ven's blade rose in a last desperate parry. Metal and light collided. Ven's weapon flew from his hand, skittering across the floor. Malgus followed, and the red blade found its mark. Ven fell without a sound. The temple's hum shifted, as if grief had become a note in its bones. Somewhere, someone screamed a name. Somewhere else, a Sith warrior laughed. Elena stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, eyes shining with horror that she could not hide. Malgus did not look at her again. If he did, he might remember that he was still capable of caring what she felt. Instead, he lifted his gaze to the high windows where smoke was beginning to creep, and he listened for the deeper thunder he knew would come next. Above Coruscant, the Empire had arrived. The first bombardment struck like the wrath of something that had been patient too long. Coruscant had known riots, assassinations, even skirmishes that left scorch marks across plazas. It had lived through centuries of politics as warfare and warfare as politics. But the sound that rolled across the Temple district now was different. It was the sound of cities realizing they were not immortal. Malgus felt it in the stone beneath his feet. A tremor, then another. Dust sifting down from high ceilings like pale sand. Somewhere above, Durasteel screamed as it bent and broke. "Keep pushing," an Imperial officer barked, and the Sith warriors surged deeper into the temple, their blades carving through defenders. Malgus stepped over fallen bodies without looking down. He had learned long ago that if you stared too long at the dead, they stared back. Yet even he could not ignore the way the temple began to die. A shockwave hammered through the halls. Far above, a section of roof collapsed, and a rain of burning fragments poured down. Padawans scrambled, choking. Jedi tried to form shields, their hands outstretched, their faces contorted with effort. Their barriers held for seconds, then buckled as the building's own weight turned against them. Malgus watched, impassive, as the Republic's most sacred place became rubble. He did not know, could not yet know, that across the city, in the marble heart of government, another death was being staged like a message. In the Senate building, Lysa fought not to run. She had been raised in halls where people's voices mattered more than their bodies, where the right word could topple a fleet, where alliances were arranged like marriages and betrayed like marriages. She had worn gowns that cost more than a worker's lifetime and spoken into microphones while senators applauded because applause was safer than dissent. Tonight, applause was gone. There was only the roar of distant explosions, the shriek of evacuation sirens, and the smell of fear, a metallic tang on the tongue, like biting down on a coin. The corridor outside the Chancellor's office was packed with security personnel and senators, all of them pressed together, trying to decide whether they were still the Republic or already refugees. Holoscreens along the wall flickered with grainy feeds of fire in the sky. Ships cutting through clouds, defensive platforms going dark one by one, then falling like dying stars. They said peace, someone choked out. They said negotiations on Alderaan. They lied. Another spat. Lysa pushed forward, her Senate pin digging into her palm. She had ripped it off without thinking, a childish instinct to hide affiliation when danger came. Now she clutched it like a talisman, as if the small piece of metal could remind her who she was supposed to be. A door blasted inward. Smoke poured in, thick and oily. Through it strode Imperial troopers in disciplined formation, blasters raised. Behind them came figures in darker armor, their sabers hissing to life. The red glow painted the marble walls as though the building itself were bleeding. And then, Angrel arrived. He wore authority like a crown, his expression cold with the impatience of a man who had waited decades for the chance to tear down a civilization. His eyes swept the crowd, not with curiosity but with inventory, as though he were counting livestock. The Chancellor stood at the center of the room, flanked by trembling aides. Baruchan had always seemed to Lysa like a man made of careful compromises, his smile practiced, his hands clean. Now his hands shook. "This is an act of war," Baruchan said, his voice hoarse but trying to sound like law. "There are negotiations underway. You will..." Angrel moved faster than Lysa's mind could follow. The red blade flashed. Baruchan's words ended in a wet gasp. His body collapsed, knees striking marble, and then he crumpled fully, his ceremonial robes spreading like spilled wine. Silence hit the room as hard as the blast door had. For a heartbeat, Lysa stared at the dead Chancellor and understood something she had always known in theory, but never truly felt. The Republic's laws meant nothing unless someone had the power to enforce them. Angrel's gaze found her. It was a predator's gaze, selecting. "You," he said, pointing with the tip of his saber. "Senator, Dort died." Lysa's throat went dry. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to claim she was no one, a clerk, an intern, a frightened citizen. But the Sith did not need her confession. They could smell status the way wolves smelled blood. Two troopers seized her arms and dragged her forward. She stumbled, her gown catching on debris, tearing at the hem. She tasted dust. Somewhere behind her, someone began to sob. Angrel leaned close enough that she could smell him, ozone and cold metal, the scent of storms. "You will tell your fellow senators," he murmured, "that Coruscant is mine." Lysa forced herself to lift her chin. If she was going to die, she would not die begging. "What do you want?" she managed. Angrel smiled, and it made her stomach turn. "To watch your Republic sign its own surrender," he said. "And then to watch it learn what surrender truly means." Outside the Senate building, Coruscant burned, and the sky fell in pieces. On Alderaan, the air smelled of snow and pine, clean enough to make the news from Coruscant feel like a lie. The hall where the delegations met had been chosen for its beauty. Stone arches like the ribs of some ancient beast. Banners of noble houses hanging in proud color. A long table set with water and ceremonial blades meant to symbolize honesty. The Republic loved symbols. The Empire loved twisting them. Barris sat as if he owned the room. He did not wear armor. He did not need to. His robes were heavy, layered, rich with embroidery that spoke of status and wealth. He looked less like a warrior than like a lord fattened on the fear of his vassals. Yet the force around him was sharp, oily, predatory. The Republic negotiators had arrived hopeful in the way of starving people offered bread. The war had been grinding them down, economically, militarily, spiritually. They had accepted the summit because they needed time, because their fleets were stretched thin, because their citizens were rioting at home and their senators were arguing about budgets while soldiers died. They had not expected the knife in the dark. A hollow sprang to life above the table, summoned by an aide who looked as though he might faint. It showed Coruscant in miniature, its familiar globe rendered in flickering light, then layered with live feeds. A streak of ships descending, blossoms of fire across the skyline. The temple district shrouded in smoke. A sound escaped one of the Republic diplomats, half sob, half prayer. Nost stared at the hollow as if it were a vision from a nightmare. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he gripped his data slate. The force around him shivered with grief, and the grief fed the panic in the room like kindling. Satelle did not move. She stood straight, one hand resting lightly near her saber. Not drawing it, not here, not in this hall, not while politics still pretended to be a shield. But her eyes had gone hard, and the calm she wore was the calm of a storm cloud holding itself back from lightning. Barriss watched them all with a faint smile, letting the horror bloom to its fullest before he spoke. "Regrettable," he said, his voice smooth. "Truly. But such tragedies occur when wars are allowed to drag on." You orchestrated this," a Republic senator snapped, too angry to be afraid. "You offered peace while you... Barriss lifted a hand, and the senator's words choked off. Not a dramatic gesture, not a theatrical strangling, just a subtle tightening in the air, as if the hall itself had decided that the man did not deserve breath. Satella's fingers twitched. Nost's eyes flashed. Barriss released the pressure, and the senator gasped, face mottled with humiliation. "Now," Barra said softly, "we may speak plainly." A Republic diplomat leaned forward, voice shaking. "If this is leverage, if you're holding Coruscant hostage, then the terms you demand will be victory," Barra said, and the word landed like a stone in a well. "The Sith Empire has offered you an end to suffering. You will accept." Nost found his voice, and when he spoke, the hall felt smaller, as if the Force itself leaned in to listen. "You call this an end? Your fleet is in our capital, the Jedi Temple." Barriss's smile widened. "Was your pride? Pride is expensive. Consider it. Paid." "None. Satelle finally spoke, and her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to strain to hear it. "If your empire wanted peace, you would not burn a temple while offering a treaty." Barriss's gaze slid to her with the slow interest of a man examining a blade he might someday own. "Ah," he murmured. Satella Shan. Hearing her own name spoken by him made Saddle's stomach twist. It was too intimate, too confident. It told her he had studied her, measured her, decided where she fit into his plans. "Sign," Barriss said, gesturing to the treaty pad set before the Republic delegation. "And Coruscant will be returned to you. Refuse, and your people will remain trapped beneath our guns until starvation teaches them obedience." The words, "returned to you," sparked a fragile hope in the room. The Republic clung to it instinctively, like a drowning person clinging to driftwood. Satelle did not cling. She stared at the hollow of Coruscant burning and felt the Force ripple with a wound so deep it made her teeth ache. Somewhere in the galaxy, at the edge of thought, she sensed something else. A cold vastness, an attention turning, as if a hidden god had noticed the capital's screams and found them useful. Above Coruscant, the Empire wore the sky like armor. The command deck of the quarantine flagship was cold, lit by hollows and the faint red spill of tactical projections. Officers moved with controlled urgency, their voices clipped, their faces set in the expressionless discipline the Empire demanded. Outside the viewport, Coruscant rotated slowly, beautiful even in ruin, its city lights dimming in patches where power grids had failed, its atmosphere bruised with smoke. Malgus stood at the center of the deck, as if he were the axis around which everything turned. The hollow map before him showed fleet positions, shield nodes, Republic traffic lanes abruptly severed. The planetary defenses, once a lattice of proud technology, had been muted. The world had become a locked room, and the Empire held the key. A captain approached, careful like a man walking toward a sleeping predator. "My lord," he said. "Angrel requests confirmation of orbital lockdown. He intends to broadcast within the hour." "He may broadcast," Malgus replied. "And—" the captain hesitated. "And the matter of departure." Malgus's gaze did not flicker. "Departure is not a matter," he said. "It is a decision." The captain swallowed. "The treaty." Malgus cut him off with a look. "The treaty is ink on a page, Captain. This is Coruscant." He turned slightly, looking down at the planet. Somewhere beneath those clouds, the temple was collapsing. Somewhere, Jedi were dying. Somewhere, civilians were running through streets they had once believed were the safest in the galaxy. Malgus felt it all like a distant pulse. Elena stood behind him near the shadowed bulkhead, her hands clasped tightly. She had been quiet since the temple. Quiet in a way that made Malgus's patience itch, because silence from her was never empty. It was full of thoughts she was weighing against her fear of speaking them. "You're thinking of keeping it," she said finally. Malgus did not deny it. "If you strike a beast and then step away," he said, voice low, "you teach it you were afraid. You teach it to recover and come for you." Elena's eyes glinted. "Or you teach it you're cruel." Malgus's mouth tightened. "Cruelty is a child's word," he said. "This is conquest." The holomap flickered, and a new signal pulsed, an incoming transmission from Draman Kas. The identifier codes carried the weight of the Dark Council. The officers stiffened. No one liked being reminded that even on the edge of victory, their lives belonged to distant hands. Malgus gestured, and the transmission blossomed into a projection. Not a face, not yet, but a symbol. An Imperial crest surrounded by a ring of text that spoke of obedience. A voice followed, distorted slightly by distance, but unmistakably Imperial. "Malgus," it said, and even through the calm, the tone carried a threat disguised as familiarity. "You will report." Malgus's eyes narrowed. He recognized the voice. Barriss. The diplomat, the author of treaties, the Sith who preferred chains of paper to chains of iron, until iron was required. "The temple is rubble," Malgus said, as if reporting weather. "Angrel holds the Senate building. The defense grid is ours. Coruscant is contained." A pause. Then Barriss's voice, velvet wrapped around a blade. "Contained for 2 days. That is the plan. The leverage is gained. The Republic will sign, and Angrel will withdraw. You will withdraw." "May." Malgus let the silence stretch. In it, he heard the unspoken. "Do not embarrass me. Do not undermine the treaty I crafted. Do not make the Dark Council question who truly holds power." Below them, Coruscant turned, and Malgus thought of Ven's eyes at the moment before he died. Unyielding, convinced. The Jedi had believed in permanence. The Republic had believed in inevitability. Malgus wanted to teach them both that nothing was inevitable except strength. "No," Malgus said. The officers froze. Even Elena's breath caught. Barriss's response came slowly, as if he were savoring the disbelief. "Explain." Malgus's voice remained calm. "If we withdraw," he said, "we gift them their symbol back. We allow them to heal. We allow them to tell their citizens, we endured and survived. We allow the Jedi to rebuild their temple into a monument of martyrdom." His gaze stayed on the planet. "If we stay," he continued, "we rewrite the galaxy." Barriss's tone sharpened. "The Emperor sanctioned this strike as leverage, not occupation." Malgus's jaw clenched at the mention of the Emperor. Visciati was a shadow behind everything. Vast, silent, felt more than seen. The Emperor's will was law, but the Emperor's will was also often unknowable, spoken through masks and intermediaries. Sith killed one another over interpretations. "The Emperor sanctioned victory," Malgus said carefully. "Victory is not a moment. It is a condition." A new voice entered the transmission, colder, edged with contempt. "Angral. Malgus," it snapped. "Do not confuse your ambitions with strategy. I hold the capital. I hold the Senate. I hold the Chancellor's corpse. The Republic will sign. Then we leave. That is the plan." "No." Malgus's eyes flicked, amused, despite himself. Angral was so certain, so proud. He had tasted Corasont and decided it was his by right. "You hold it," Malgus said. "For now." Angral bristled. "Careful." Malgus ended the transmission without ceremony. The command deck exhaled in a collective silence, as if everyone had been holding breath waiting for the universe to punish them. Elena stared at him. "You just declared war on your own council." Malgus did not look away from the burning planet. "No," he said. "I declared the truth." Outside, Coruscant turned beneath Imperial guns, and Malgus began to plan how to make the Dark Council accept the inevitable. The ruins of the temple did not look like a battlefield anymore. They looked like a grave. Night had settled over Coruscant in a sickly haze. Fires burned in pockets, casting a dull orange glow through the ash. The once sacred courtyard was a landscape of shattered stone and twisted metal. Statues toppled and broken so their faces stared sightlessly at the sky. Malgus walked through it alone, his footsteps crunching over debris that had been part of 1,000 years of faith. He had left the command deck under the excuse of inspection, though inspection was something officers did. Malgus came because the force here was loud in a way it hadn't been inside the battle, loud with aftermath, with death settling into place. Elena followed at a distance, unwilling to leave him but wary of the ruin's weight. She had wrapped her cloak tighter around herself. Her eyes kept flicking to shadows between broken columns. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Malgus glanced at her. "I'm here because of what you're thinking," he replied. Elena's lips pressed together. "You don't know what I'm thinking." He almost smiled. "I do," he said. "You're thinking this place deserved better. You're thinking the people inside deserved better. You're thinking, dangerously, that you deserve better." "No, Imka." Elena flinched as if struck. "I didn't say." Malgus raised a hand and she fell silent. Not because he forced her, but because his expression had changed. Alert, listening. A ripple moved through the ash-laden air. A presence. Not Imperial. Not Sith. Something taut with grief and fury. Malgus turned. Erin emerged from the shadows near a collapsed archway, her saber already lit, the green blade casting eerie light across her dust-smeared face. She looked younger than Malgus expected, though there was nothing youthful in her eyes. Those eyes had stared at something terrible and decided it would not look away again. "Malgus," she said, her voice raw. Elena drew back instinctively. Malgus regarded Erin with a calm that was almost insulting. "You came," he said. "I wondered if you would." Erin's jaw trembled. "You murdered Ven," she hissed. "You murdered my order. You—" "Spare me," Malgus said, and the softness of his tone made the dismissal sharper. "Your order has murdered worlds with sanctimonious smiles. It has called conquest, liberation when the Republic needed resources. It has hidden behind laws while it bled the rim to fatten the core." "Nay, madam." Erin's saber quivered. "We're not the Sith." "No," Malgus agreed. "You're worse. You pretend you're not capable of what you are." Erin lunged. Her movements were swift, fueled by emotion that made her unpredictable. Malgus ignited his saber and met her strike with a casual parry, sparks spraying into the ash. Erin attacked again, blade snapping at his shoulder, then his legs, trying to overwhelm him with speed. Malgus stepped back once, then planted his feet. He let the force swell, and the next time Erin struck, he caught her blade and twisted. Her saber flew from her hand, spinning end over end before landing in the rubble with a hiss. Erin froze, chest heaving, eyes wide. She stared at her empty hand, disbelief warring with rage. Malgus could have killed her then. It would have been easy. It would have been clean. Instead, he deactivated his saber. Erin's gaze snapped up. "Why?" she demanded. "Why aren't you killing me?" Elena watched, trembling. She did not understand either. She had seen Malgus execute officers for errors smaller than this. Malgus stepped closer, close enough that Erin could see the scars on his face, the old burns that had never fully faded. "Because you're exactly what the Republic will become," he said. "After tonight." Erin's lip curled. "I'd rather die." "You will," Malgus said, "if you cling to their illusion. But if you let go, you could be something else." Erin's eyes flickered, a moment of confusion, a crack in certainty. "You think I would join you?" Malgus's voice was quiet. "I think you already left your order the moment you came here for revenge." Erin's breath hitched. The accusation landed true enough to wound. Behind her, the temple ruins creaked as if settling deeper into themselves. The ash fell thicker, blurring the world. Erin's hand clenched into a fist. She glanced toward where her saber lay. For a moment, Malgus thought she might attack again, and he was ready. Instead, she turned sharply, snatched up her weapon, and backed away. "This isn't over," she spat. Malgus inclined his head. "No," he agreed. "It's beginning." Erin vanished into the shadows. Elena exhaled shakily. "You let her go." Malgus looked down at the rubble. "Yes," he said. "Because she will carry the story of this ruin into the galaxy. And stories," he added softly. Elena stared at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. "What story do you want them to tell?" Malgus turned his gaze toward the distant glow of the Senate building. "That Coruscant fell," he said, "and did not rise again." Engrel had taken Baruchan's office as if it had always belonged to him. The Chancellor's private chamber had been designed for quiet power. Soft lighting, polished stone, subtle luxuries meant to remind visitors that the Republic governed not by force, but by refinement. Engrel had stripped it of that pretense within hours. Furniture had been shoved aside to make room for hollowables. Imperial banners hung where Republic insignia had once gleamed. The air smelled of smoke and sweat and the faint metallic tang of blood that no cleaning could fully erase. Lysa stood at the center of the room, held by troopers who gripped her arms like restraints. She could feel their gloves through her torn sleeves, the pressure bruising. She refused to wince. Pain was private, humiliation was public. On the floor near the doorway lay a senator she recognized, an older man who had once lectured her about decorum in Senate sessions. His eyes were open, fixed on nothing. A vibroblade protruded from his throat at an angle that made his death look like an accident of clumsiness rather than an execution. Engrel watched Lysa watch the corpse. His expression held satisfaction, as if he enjoyed forcing her to measure the cost of resistance. "You will speak," he said. "I'm a senator," Lysa replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I always speak." Engrel's mouth twitched. "Clever," he said. "Then use that cleverness to save lives. Tell Coruscant that it is under Imperial protection. Tell them to remain in their homes. Tell them that the Republic has agreed to peace." Lysa's stomach twisted. "Peace," she echoed, looking around at the banners, the dead senator, the soot-streaked marble. "Is this what you call peace?" "This is order," Engrel said. "Peace is what you call it when the strong decide to stop killing you." A small holodrone floated near the ceiling, its lenses glinting. It had been positioned to record her statement, to broadcast it, to turn her face into a symbol. Lysa's throat tightened. She imagined the citizens of Coruscant watching, terrified families huddled in apartments, workers trapped in transit tunnels, children crying while their parents tried to pretend everything was fine. She imagined them seeing her, a senator, and searching her expression for reassurance. She could give them a lie. She could give them a lie that might keep them alive for a day, a week, long enough for anyone, to act. She could also refuse. She could refuse and watch Engrel make an example of her too. They would broadcast her death instead. That would also be a story. What happens if I don't? Lysa asked quietly. Angrel leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Then, I pick another senator, he said. And another. And another. Until the Senate is a row of corpses and the Republic's voice is silence. Naga, manma, dezi, deun ka. Thou, aror, try. Lysa swallowed. Her Senate pin cut into her palm. She clenched it harder. You will be remembered, Angrel added, voice almost gentle. You could be remembered as the woman who helped end a war. Or as the woman who helped crown a tyrant, Lysa thought. She lifted her chin toward the holodrone. In its lens, she could see herself reflected. A noble woman's daughter reduced to torn fabric and soot, eyes wide but unbroken. My fellow citizens, she began, and the words tasted like ashes. This is Senator Lysa Reth of Corasont. There has been an attack. Angrel's smile widened. Lysa forced herself to continue. The Sith Empire has secured key districts. The Senate advises all citizens to remain calm and stay indoors. Do not attempt to travel. She paused, because she could not say the next lie. Do not resist. The word caught in her throat like a splinter. Angrel's gaze sharpened. Lysa breathed in. Do not give in to panic, she said instead. Hold to one another. Protect your families. Remember who you are. Nay, come to my. Angrel's hand twitched, and for a moment Lysa thought he would strike her for that last sentence. But he merely laughed softly, amused. Beautiful, he said. Even your defiance can be used. The holodrone blinked and shut off, its recording complete. Lysa's statement would be cut, edited, framed. Her message turned into whatever the Empire needed. As the troopers dragged her toward a side chamber, Lysa caught sight of the stars through a tall window. Somewhere out there, Alderane's negotiators still sat at a table. Somewhere, Jedi still breathed. She whispered, to no one and everyone, don't leave us. Angrel's voice followed her, like a promise. No one is coming, he said. Coruscant belongs to the Empire now. In the lower levels, the war did not arrive as fire from the sky. It arrived as rules. Jax had spent his life beneath Coruscant's shining surface, where the air tasted like metal and old cooking oil, and the sun was a rumor told by people who sold fake holopictures. He worked maintenance, pipe systems, transit conduits, the veins that kept the upper city alive. He had never seen the Senate building in person. He had never cared to. He cared now, because the Empire had brought the Senate's violence down into the belly of the world. The first sign had been the silence. Communications went patchy, then dead. The public holoscreens that usually blared advertisements and Senate announcements turned to static. Transit trams stopped mid-run. Doors locked. People swore, pounded on panels, tried to force their way through, and then began to realize that something larger than a system failure had happened. The second sign had been the marching. Imperial troopers moved through the undercity in disciplined lines, boots striking metal walkways in a rhythm that sounded like a judge's gavel. They carried blasters at the ready. Their helmets were blank. They did not look like people. They looked like decisions made flesh. Jack stood pressed against a stained wall with a crowd of others. Workers, vendors, a woman clutching a baby whose face was smeared with soot. A trooper passed close enough that Jax could see the scratches on the armor, the dried grime in the seams. These soldiers had fought their way into Coruscant. They were not here on parade. A man beside Jax muttered, "They can't do this. Coruscant's the core. The Republic will." A rifle butt slammed into the man's stomach. He doubled over, gagging. The trooper did not speak. It did not need to. The message was physical. You do not get to predict the future anymore. A hollow speaker crackled overhead. A voice, clipped and unfamiliar, echoed down the corridor. By order of the provisional governor, all citizens are subject to martial restrictions. Curfew begins immediately. Any gatherings larger than 10 will be treated as insurgent activity. People whispered. Someone began to cry. Someone else spat on the floor. Jax's hands curled into fists. He had never been political. Politics were for people with windows. But he knew oppression when he felt it. He had lived under the Republic's indifference, which was a soft oppression. A slow starvation hidden beneath promises. This was different. This was a boot on the throat. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A woman slipping through the crowd, passing something from palm to palm with practiced ease. A scrap of coated paper, old-fashioned in a world of hollows. It landed in Jax's hand as if by accident. He glanced down. The writing was crude, hurried, scratched in black. Meet at the old service shaft. Midnight. Bring tools. Jax's pulse quickened. He looked up, searching for the woman, but she was gone. Swallowed by bodies. Only a brief flash of her eyes remained in his memory. Hard, determined, not afraid. A trooper's head turned slightly, scanning the crowd. Jax forced his face blank. He folded the scrap carefully and slid it into his boot. When the patrol moved on, the crowd loosened with a collective exhale. People began to shuffle toward their homes, heads down, shoulders hunched. The undercity street lamps flickered, casting light that looked like torchlight on wet metal. Jax waited until no one was watching. Then he stepped away from the wall and moved into a side corridor that smelled of mold and old electricity. As he walked, he passed graffiti. The Republic crest scratched into a panel, half obscured by fresh red symbols painted over it. Sith runes, bold and mocking. Someone had tried to carve the Republic back into the metal, but the marks were shallow. Jax stopped and, without thinking, took out his tool knife. He began to carve deeper, cutting through paint, through metal, through the lies that said the Republic was already dead. The crest emerged, scarred but visible. He didn't know yet what he would do at midnight. He didn't know who would be there. He only knew that he could not stand still while his city was claimed by strangers. Above him, in the upper levels, senators were being held hostage. Jedi were bleeding in ruins. Sith were arguing over what their victory meant. In the undercity, a worker sharpened a knife and started to become a rebel. Storms did not rage on Drummond cause. They ruled. Rain hammered the fortress windows like an army demanding entry. Lightning flashed, turning faces in the dark council chamber into masks of bone and shadow for a heartbeat at a time. The air smelled of wet stone and old power. Barris stood at the center of it, beneath the gaze of Sith who had killed for less than a moment's disrespect. He had spoken before councils, before armies, before men and women who believed themselves gods. He had never felt so close to being devoured as he did now. The hollow of Corasont rotated above a black stone pit, its surface dotted with glowing markers, Imperial positions, Republic holdouts, the Temple district marked with a symbol that might as well have been a tombstone. "The Republic will sign," Barris said, keeping his voice steady. "They have no choice. The strike has served its purpose. We withdraw as agreed, and the Cold War begins on our terms." A Sith on the council leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "And if we do not withdraw?" the Lord purred, the question almost playful. Barris's jaw tightened. "Then we invalidate the treaty," he replied. "We turn leverage into endless occupation. We drain our resources holding a planet that will bleed us for every kilometer. We invite a unified Republic response rather than a fractured one." Another voice cut in, sharper. "We already have occupation." The speaker's hollow shimmered. Angrel had not bothered to appear in person, too consumed with his prize to leave it. His projection's eyes were bright with triumph. "Coruscant is ours. The Senate is ours. This is not a bargaining chip. This is a throne." Murmurs rippled. Hunger glinted in eyes. Barris despised hunger. Hunger was what made Sith sloppy. Hunger was what made them show their fangs too early. "You are a warrior," Barris said, tone laced with disdain. "Not a strategist. Coruscant is a symbol." "Yes, but symbols are costly. We can have the galaxy without chaining ourselves to its most rebellious world. Angrel's projection sneered. You speak like a diplomat, he spat. Always paper, always promises. The Republic has had centuries to believe in its own inevitability. We should crush that belief beneath our heel and not step off until it stops twitching. A Sith woman on the council, her face hidden beneath a hood of black silk, laughed softly. He has a point, she murmured. Imagine the Jedi kneeling before our banners. Barriss felt bile rise. You imagine, he said coldly, because you have never governed anything but your own appetites. Lightning flashed. For a heartbeat, the chamber's faces were starkly revealed. Predators, all of them, weighing Coruscant like meat. Then a new hollow appeared at the edge of the pit, Malgus. His image was less ornate than Angrel's. No grand gestures, no display. Just a scarred face and eyes like cooled lava. I will speak, Malgus said. Barriss's lips thinned. You already did, he replied. When you defied me. Malgus did not blink. Coruscant is not simply a symbol, he said. It is a weapon. If we keep it, the Republic's people will learn fear where they once learned pride. Their Senate will become a puppet theater. Their Jedi will be hunted through their own ruins. Every world watching will understand that the core is not sacred. A council member hissed. And the cost? Malgus's gaze was steady. The cost is blood, he said. But war is blood. The Republic has been bleeding us for decades. Let them bleed for once. Barriss slammed a fist onto the edge of the stone pit. The sound echoed, swallowed by thunder. You would turn a calculated victory into a vanity project, he snapped. You would risk the Emperor's plan. The word Emperor silenced the chamber more effectively than any shout. Even Angrel's projection stiffened, his triumph dimming at the edges. The Emperor was not a man you invoked lightly. His will was a shadow that stretched across centuries. A voice spoke from behind Barriss, soft enough that it might have been rain. What is the Emperor's plan? Barriss turned. A council attendant stood near the back, hooded, unremarkable, the kind of person no one remembered after a meeting. Yet the force around the attendant was wrong, deep and cold, like standing near a pit that had no bottom. Barriss's blood turned to ice. The attendant lifted a hand. The hood fell back. The face beneath was not the Emperor's. No one truly knew the Emperor's face, but it carried the sense of him, the weight of a presence inhabiting flesh like a borrowed cloak. The voice. Every Sith in the chamber stiffened. Some bowed their heads. Some tried not to, then did anyway. The strike served its purpose, the voice said. And the tone was neither approval nor disapproval. It was inevitability. Coruscant will remain under Imperial control. Barriss's mouth opened, but no words came. Angrel's projection brightened with vindication. Malgus's eyes narrowed, as if he had expected this and still disliked it. The treaty will be signed, the voice continued. The Republic will believe Coruscant will be returned. They will tell themselves the Empire is reasonable. They will be wrong. A shiver ran through Barriss that had nothing to do with the storm outside. My lord, he began carefully. Holding Coruscant will provoke. Yes, the voice said. It will. The voice's gaze, empty, vast, moved over them. Provoke them into despair, into hatred, into choices they would not otherwise make. And in those choices, it murmured, the galaxy will open. Lightning cracked so close the chamber's walls vibrated. For a heartbeat, Barriss understood that Coruscant was not being held for politics. It was being held for something deeper, something that made treaties and councils feel like children's games. The voice smiled faintly. You will build, it said, where their temple fell. Malgus's expression tightened. What? He asked. A spire, the voice said. A focus, a monument. Coruscant will become more than a capital. It will become a wound. Barriss swallowed hard. He wanted to protest. He wanted to argue. But he could feel the Emperor's will pressing down like a mountain. The voice's gaze returned to Barriss. "You will finish the treaty," it said. "You will sign it with their blood still wet on the page, and then you will watch them realize that nothing they sign matters." Barriss bowed his head, forced. "As you command." The voice's hood fell forward again, and the presence receded, leaving only rain and thunder and the council's sudden, uneasy silence. Malgus's hollow faded. Angral's projection lingered, triumphant. Barriss stared at the rotating hollow of Coruscant and felt something he had not felt in years. Fear, not of death, but of being part of a plan he could not control. The treaty pad felt heavier than it should have, as if the words written into its circuitry were made of stone. The Republic delegation sat in stunned silence, staring at the clauses Barriss had authored with such careful cruelty. Deadlines, withdrawals, concessions, systems abandoned, allies cut loose. The kind of peace that demanded one side bleed and call it mercy. Nost read the terms with a face like carved grief. His fingers traced lines he wished were illusions. He looked up once, meeting Saddle's gaze, and in his eyes she saw the same question that clawed at her. How do you sign away a world? The hollow above the table flickered. Coruscant still burned. Every time the feed glitched, the image momentarily froze, ships hanging in the sky like carrion birds, fire blossoming in the Temple district. A Republic diplomat whispered, "If we sign, they leave." They said they leave. Barriss watched the whisperer, as a man might watch a rabbit convince itself the trap is not there. He leaned forward, voice smooth. "The occupation ends," he said. "That is written here. Coruscant is returned. Your people are freed, and in exchange you will honor the Empire's borders. You will stop spilling blood in systems you can no longer protect." Satella's hands were clenched so tightly her nails bit into her palms. She could feel the force around the room. Fear, desperation, shame. Jedi were trained not to let emotion dictate action. But this was not a duel. This was a noose. A Republic senator looked at her. "Master Shan," he said hoarsely. "If we refuse, they'll keep killing. They'll keep the blockade. We can't." Satella closed her eyes. For a moment she saw the temple as it had been. Calm halls, apprentices laughing quietly, masters moving like shadows. She saw Ven's steady gaze, though she had not been there when he died. She felt his death like a distant star going out. Then she saw children in Coruscant streets choking on smoke. She saw undercity workers trapped in transit tunnels with no food. She saw senators dragged into Angral's chamber to be broken like tools. She opened her eyes. "You sign," she said quietly, and each word tasted like betrayal. "Because you must keep them alive long enough to fight another day." Nost's eyes closed briefly, as if in pain. "And what of honor?" he asked. Satella's voice hardened. "Honor does not feed starving people," she replied. "Honor does not stop bombardments. We sign and we survive. Then we rebuild." Barriss's smile deepened, pleased, as if she had stepped exactly where he wanted. One by one, Republic hands reached for the stylus. A senator signed, jaw clenched. A diplomat signed, eyes red. Each signature felt like a nail hammered into a coffin. Nost signed last, his hand trembling, his face pale. When he finished, he set the stylus down as if it were poisoned. Barriss took the stylus next, his fingers wrapped around it with practiced ease. He paused, looking at their faces, letting the moment sink in. Then he signed with a flourish that made the act look like art. The treaty pad chimed softly, confirming completion. A sound too gentle for what had just happened. Outside, snow drifted past the hall's tall windows, peaceful and indifferent. Satell stared at the hollow of Coruscant burning and felt the force twist, a deep unease that refused to settle. Something was wrong. Not with the treaty. She knew exactly how wrong that was. but with the sense of finality in the room. The Republic negotiators exhaled as if the worst had passed. They believed the occupation would end because the words said it would. Sattel did not believe in words anymore. Barriss rose. "It is done," he said. "You will receive confirmation of the Empire's withdrawal within the day." He looked at Sattel, and the smile he offered her was a knife disguised as courtesy. "You have made a wise choice," he murmured. Sattel held his gaze, refusing to look away. "If you lie," she said softly, "no treaty will protect you." Barriss's eyes glinted. "Treaties protect only those who can enforce them," he replied, and then he turned away. As he left the hall, Barriss touched a comm at his wrist. His voice dropped low, too low for the Republic to hear. "Hold Corasont," he said into the device, and his tone carried a reluctant obedience. As commanded. Sattel watched him go and felt the cold vastness in the Force stir again, like something hungry shifting in its sleep. The third day dawned gray. Coruscant's citizens had always thought of dawn as a formality. The planet's light cycles were managed, curated, adjusted to keep commerce moving and mood stable. Even sunrise was engineered. Now the sky was a smear of smoke, and the light that filtered through felt dirty, as if the sun itself had been dragged through ash before reaching the streets. In Senate Plaza, people gathered because they were forced to. Imperial patrols swept through districts, herding civilians toward the open square beneath the Senate building's towering facade. Families clung together. Workers still wore their grease-stained clothes. Wealthier citizens arrived in fine coats that could not hide the fear in their eyes. A line of troopers stood like a wall, their blasters held across their chests, helmets blank. Behind them, Sith warriors waited, sabers unlit but present, like executioners leaning on axes. Angrel stepped onto a black metal podium that had been erected where Republic officials once gave speeches about unity. The podium bore no Republic crest. It bore only the Empire's symbol, sharp and uncompromising. His voice boomed through hollow speakers, amplified until it filled the plaza and spilled into surrounding streets. "Citizens of Coruscant," he began, and the way he said it, like claiming a possession, sent a murmur through the crowd. Lysa watched from above, trapped behind a balcony grill that had been installed overnight. A gilded cage. The Empire had dressed it up with polished metal, as if aesthetic could soften imprisonment. Beside her stood an Imperial officer, face unreadable. "You will stand here," he said quietly. "You will watch. You will be seen watching." Lysa's jaw tightened. "So I can look compliant," she said. "So you can look alive," the officer replied. Below, Angrel spread his hands. "The Republic has agreed to peace. The Treaty of Coruscant has been signed. Hostilities are over." A collective exhale rose from the crowd, relief, fragile and desperate. People wanted to believe. They wanted the nightmare to be temporary. Angrel waited for the relief to bloom fully before he continued. "However," he said, and the word cracked like a whip, "peace requires order. Coruscant will remain under Imperial stewardship to ensure compliance and stability. Your Senate will be reorganized. Your security forces will be restructured. Your travel will be restricted until further notice." "No, Auntie." The relief died. It did not fade. It snapped. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "You can't!" Another voice cried, "The treaty!" Angrel's smile was thin. "The treaty ensures peace," he said. "It does not ensure your comfort." A woman near the front began to sob. A man beside her clenched his fists, trembling. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, asking questions no one could answer. Behind Angrel, Imperial banners unfurled, black and crimson, dropping over Republic statues like burial shrouds. The motion was slow, deliberate, ceremonial. A conquest dressed as administration. A group of citizens, perhaps thinking submission would buy safety, sank to their knees. Others stayed standing, rigid, refusing. Lysa's hands curled around the balcony rail until her knuckles whitened. From this height, she could see faces clearly. Fear, anger, disbelief. She could also see the Empire's intent. Break the crowd by forcing them to witness the moment hope died. Angrel's gaze lifted, finding her. He raised a hand slightly, acknowledging her presence like a puppet master acknowledging a marionette. Lysa forced herself not to look away. "You will obey these measures," Angrel declared, "and you will be rewarded with the privilege of survival. Resist, and you will be treated as insurgents." A shout rose from somewhere in the crowd, raw, furious. "Corasont is the Republic." The speaker, a young man, undercity by his accent, was seized instantly by troopers. He fought, twisting, spitting, and for a moment the crowd surged as if they might intervene. Angrel lifted his hand. A Sith warrior stepped forward, ignited a saber, and cut the man down in a single motion. The crowd recoiled as if struck. The body hit the ground hard. Blood splattered the stone. Angrel's voice remained calm. "Let that be an example," he said. Lysa's stomach turned. She forced herself to keep breathing. The Empire wanted citizens to feel powerless. Powerlessness was a drug. Once the crowd tasted it, many would crave it, because fear was easier than resistance. But resistance lived in the places fear could not fully smother. In clenched fists, in held gazes, in quiet vows made in the dark. As the crowd dispersed under armed escort, Lysa saw one man glance back at the banners with a look that was not merely anger, but calculation. A worker's face, grease-stained, familiar somehow, even from above. He vanished into the moving mass, swallowed by the city. Lysa turned her eyes to the smoke-heavy sky and whispered, too soft for the officer beside her to hear, "They're going to regret this." From the balcony, the officer watched her with faint curiosity, as if wondering whether she meant the Empire, the Republic, or all of them. They returned to Coruscant like thieves returning to a burned home. The Corvette slipped through smog and darkness with its transponder masked, engines kept low to avoid drawing too much attention. It found a landing in a half-ruined hangar that once served diplomatic traffic. Now scorched by bombardment, littered with debris, its doors twisted and partially sealed. Satelle stepped down the ramp into air that tasted like ash. Her cloak, still dusted with Alderaan's snow at the hem, looked strangely out of place here, like winter wandering into a furnace. Nost followed, his expression grim. Behind them came a handful of Jedi and Republic commandos, all of them quiet, all of them carrying the kind of tension that made even breathing feel loud. They had argued about coming. The Senate delegation had begged them not to. Too dangerous, too reckless, too likely to provoke the Empire into harsher measures. But Satelle had insisted. "If Coruscant is truly occupied," she had said, "then our people need to know they're not alone, and the Jedi need what was left behind. Not just people. Archives, holocrons, knowledge that could keep the Order from collapsing into scattered survivors." They moved through the hangar's shadows, stepping over burnt crates and twisted metal. The city above thrummed with distant engines and occasional screams, muffled by layers of concrete and durasteel. Curfew had turned Coruscant into a haunted kingdom, streets patrolled by faceless soldiers. A commando signaled, "Movement ahead." They pressed into a corridor and watched as an Imperial patrol passed. 4 troopers, a Sith warrior trailing like a wolf behind them. The warrior's saber was unlit, but the force around him was sharp, probing. Satelle held her breath and wrapped her presence in calm, the Jedi's art of being unnoticed, not by absence, but by stillness. When the patrol moved on, they continued. Nost whispered, "The treaty is already broken." Satella's jaw tightened. "It was broken the moment they attacked," she replied. "But the clause," Nost began, then stopped, because the clause meant nothing now. Words had failed. They emerged onto a service platform overlooking part of the Temple district. Smoke drifted in thick curtains. Searchlights swept across ruins, their red beams cutting through ash like hostile eyes. Where the temple had once stood, There was a crater of broken stone and blackened frameworks. Imperial engineers moved through it like scavengers. Sith banners hung from surviving pillars. Satell felt the force there, wounded, raw, a scream trapped in debris. It hit her so hard she had to grip the railing. Nost's voice cracked. Satell closed her eyes, forcing herself to center. Grief could be a weapon, but it could also be a trap. The Sith wanted the Jedi to react blindly, to rush into ruin and die dramatically. Heroes were easy to kill. A commando beside her murmured, "We're here for survivors?" "And the archives," Satella said. "If anything remains." They descended into the district through back passages, using old maintenance routes the commandos had mapped from Republic infrastructure records. The tunnels smelled of dust and burned circuitry. At one junction, Satella paused. She sensed something. Familiar anger. A presence like a blade wrapped in cloth. A figure stepped from the shadows, saber already in hand. Green light glinted off her face. Satell raised her own weapon, not igniting it yet, studying the other Jedi. "Aaron," Nost breathed, recognition and surprise mingling. Aaron's eyes flashed. "You're here," she said, voice rough. "Good. That means the Order isn't dead enough yet to know when to run." Satell did not flinch at the bitterness. "We're here because Coruscant is our home," she replied. Aaron's mouth twisted. "It's their trophy now." Satell stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Then help us take something back," she said. "Help us save who we can." Aaron hesitated. For a moment, the anger in her expression warred with exhaustion. Then she nodded once, sharp. "There are civilians hiding in the lower halls," Aaron said. "And there's an Imperial quarantine line around the ruins. Malgus controls the orbital net. Angral controls the streets. They're building something in the crater." Nost frowned. "Building?" Aaron's gaze flicked toward the temple's broken heart. "A spire," she said. "Black metal. Sith runes. I don't know why." Satell felt cold crawl up her spine. She thought of the vast presence she had sensed on Alderaan, the hunger behind the occupation. "We'll find out," she said. Aaron's eyes narrowed. "If we survive long enough," she replied. And then, without ceremony, she turned and led them deeper into Coruscant's wounds. On the fourth night of occupation, Jax learned the difference between resistance and rebellion. Resistance was whispering in service shafts. It was carving old symbols into metal. It was sharing scraps of food under curfew. Resistance was survival with teeth. Rebellion was walking into a room knowing you might not walk out. The old service shaft meeting had been real. Tools were brought. Faces were hidden. Plans were spoken in hurried fragments. Sabotage a power node, jam a patrol channel, steal ration packs from an Imperial cache. Small acts, the kind that made people feel less helpless. And then the trap snapped shut. Not with troopers bursting in and blasters firing. The Empire did not always need violence. Sometimes it needed only patience. A woman had appeared in the shaft, tall, composed, wearing a dark coat that looked too clean for the undercity. She had not raised a weapon. She had simply spoken names. The names of those present. The names of their children. The address of a grandmother living alone in an upper-level apartment. The location of a lover's workplace. "Leave," she had said calmly. "Go home. Forget tonight. Or the next time you see your family will be in a detention block." Nan Meza. Some people ran. Some fell to their knees. One man lunged, and the woman's escort, a silent figure in Imperial black, had broken his arm without a sound. Jax had not moved. He had stared at the woman until she turned her eyes on him with mild interest. Now he sat across from her in a safe house that felt like a castle chamber carved out of Coruscant's underbelly. Red glass lantern light cast shadows across metal walls. Hollow screens displayed surveillance feeds. Streets, corridors, service tunnels. Faces highlighted by targeting boxes. The woman studied him as if he were a document. "I'm not sure why you didn't run," she said. Jax's cheek throbbed where a trooper had struck him during transport. He kept his hands on the table, fingers curled around a small knife he had managed to conceal. It was pathetic against an empire. It was something. "Maybe I'm tired of running," he said. The woman's lips curved faintly. "Brave," she murmured. "Or foolish." She leaned back. "My name is Nira," she said. "You may address me as Watcher if you prefer titles." Jax spat on the floor. "What do you want?" Nira's gaze did not harden. It softened as if she were amused by his attempt at defiance. "What does anyone want?" she asked. "Control. Security. A predictable world." Jax's knife shifted slightly in his fingers. "You're here to threaten me." "Yes," Nira said without hesitation. "But threats are inefficient. I prefer arrangements." She tapped a control on the table. A hollow appeared between them. Jax's face, captured from a transit camera. Then another hollow. The old service shaft meeting faces blurred but recognizable. Then another. A woman Jax knew. His sister, walking home from her shift, unaware of the trooper following at a distance. Jax's blood went cold. His throat tightened. "Leave her out of this." Nira tilted her head. "That depends," she said, "on whether you become useful." Jax forced himself to breathe. "Useful how?" Nira's fingers traced the edge of a datapad like someone stroking a pet. "The undercity is full of anger," she said. "Anger turns into action. Action turns into blood. Blood turns into martyrs. Martyrs turn into movements." "Nani?" Jax stared at her, suspicion sharpening. "So you want to stop it?" Nira's smile was small, almost gentle. "No," she said. "I want to steer it." Jax's stomach turned. "You're insane." "I'm practical," Nira replied. "The Empire will hold Coruscant. That is not negotiable. The question is whether the city becomes a slow, costly wound or a disciplined engine." She leaned forward. "You know the tunnels. You know the people. You know where anger is loudest. You can guide us to the ones who will cause the most trouble. In return, your sister lives. You live. Me. Sure." Jax's hand tightened around his knife until his knuckles ached. "And if I refuse?" Nira's eyes flicked to the hollow of his sister. The trooper behind her in the feed stepped closer, just enough to make the threat clear. Jax's vision tunneled. Rage surged, hot and blinding. He wanted to throw the knife across the table and bury it in Nira's throat. He wanted to watch her choke on surprise. But he also saw his sister's face in the hollow, tired, unaware, alive. He swallowed his hatred like poison. "What if I agree?" he said slowly, voice rough. "And then I lie to you?" Nira's smile deepened, approving. "Then you're smarter than I hoped," she said. "But you won't lie well enough." Jax forced himself to meet her gaze. "You don't know me," he said. Nira's eyes gleamed with something like curiosity. "I know your type," she replied. "The kind of man who believes he can survive a storm by clenching his fists. Sometimes you can. Sometimes the storm simply chooses not to notice you." She stood, coat whispering as she moved. "Think carefully," she said. "The Empire is not asking for your loyalty, only your usefulness." Jax stared at the hollows until his eyes burned. Outside the safe house, Coruscant's undercity hummed with quiet rebellion. Above, Sith argued over spires and treaties and symbols. Somewhere in the ruins, Jedi moved like ghosts. And in a red-lit room, a worker weighed betrayal against survival, and discovered that sometimes they were the same coin, just flipped in different light. The Senate Tower had been designed to impress. Even its private chambers felt like rooms built to house history. Angrel had taken the grand halls and the Chancellor's office, the places meant for spectacle. Malgus had chosen a smaller room tucked behind the old War Council annex, less visible, more useful. War maps covered the table. Not the stylized holos the Senate liked to display for propaganda, but raw tactical projections, troop routes through Coruscant's layered levels, Supply lines from orbit, detention sites, shield nodes, hidden tunnels. The city was being turned into a machine, and every machine required schematics. Elena sat on a low stool near the wall. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. The room's single red lamp cast light that made her skin look almost translucent. Shadows from a barred window fell across her face, striping her features as if she were already imprisoned. Malgus stood over the maps, helmet off, his scars stark. In this light he looked older than his years, carved by battle into something harsh and enduring. "You shouldn't be here," Elena said quietly. Malgus did not look up. "You've said that before." Elena's breath shuddered. "This place," she whispered. "Coruscant. It's not." She stopped, searching for words that would not get her killed. "It's not the victory you think it is." Malgus's fingers traced a route on the map, Imperial patrol patterns tightening around the Temple district. "Victory is not what you feel," he said. "It's what remains when feeling is gone." Elena's eyes flashed. "So you want to kill feeling?" she said. "In them. In you. In me." Malgus finally looked at her. His gaze was steady, but something in it shifted like a crack in stone. "I want to end the war," he said. Elena laughed softly, bitter. "By making it permanent?" Malgus's mouth tightened. The Republic would have dragged this conflict out for another century if it meant keeping their pride intact, he said. "They think the core is inviolable. They think Coruscant is the galaxy's spine. If we break it, we break their will to fight." Elena stood, trembling. "And what do you break in yourself to do it?" she asked. Malgus's jaw clenched. He could have shouted. He could have struck the table, vented his frustration like so many Sith did. Instead, he remained still, and the stillness was more dangerous than anger. "You were a slave," he said softly. Elena flinched. "Don't." "You were owned," Malgus continued, voice measured. "You were used. You were told your life belonged to someone else, and then you met me." Elena's eyes glistened, fury and grief mixing. "Yes," she said, "and I thought you were different." Malgus stepped closer. The room felt smaller, the air thick with unsaid things. "I am different," he said, "because I did not pretend your chains were kindness. I broke them. I gave you a place at my side." "Nay, unlie." Elena's laugh broke, turning into something like a sob. "At your side," she echoed, "in the shadow of your war." Malgus's gaze flicked away for a heartbeat, as if her words had struck something tender he wanted to deny existed. Then he looked back, hardening. "You're alive," he said, "because of what I am." Elena's face crumpled, then set. "And what are they alive for?" she demanded, gesturing vaguely toward the city beyond the walls. "Those children in the lower levels. Those families trapped under curfew. Are they alive for your victory?" "No." Malgus's voice dropped. "They are alive because I allow them to be," he said. The cruelty of the statement was casual. It was also true, and that was what made it unbearable. Elena's hands shook. "That's not strength," she whispered. "That's—" "Say it," Malgus challenged, stepping closer. "Say what you think I am." Elena stared at him for a long moment. In her eyes, Malgus saw love still there, stubborn and painful, refusing to die. He also saw fear. Not fear of his power, but fear of what his power was turning him into. "A monster," Elena said, and the word came out small, devastated. Malgus's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went dark, as if a door had closed. "Then you understand," he said quietly. Elena's breath hitched. "No," she whispered. I don't think you understand what you're losing." Malgus turned back to the map, dismissing the conversation with emotion that felt like exile. "Go," he said. "Get rest." Elena hesitated, then moved toward the door. She paused there, her hand on the frame. "Malgus," she said softly. If Coruscant breaks you. He did not answer. Elena left, and the door shut behind her with a sound too final for a simple latch. Malgus stood alone with his maps and the burning city beyond the walls. He listened to the distant hum of Imperial machinery, and the faint, persistent pulse of Coruscant's Supertivlani, its resistance, rising like a heartbeat in the dark. He did not know yet whether he was conquering Coruscant or being claimed by it. Angrel's court had begun to form almost immediately, as if tyranny required an audience. Sith and officers drifted around him in the Senate Tower's halls like nobles around a king, each one offering advice, flattery, threats disguised as loyalty. Angrel basked in it. He enjoyed being seen. He enjoyed being feared. He enjoyed the sense that history was watching him and nodding. That enjoyment made him careless. The assassination attempt came in a corridor lined with old Republic art, tapestries depicting ancient victories, now darkened by soot and the smoke of recent war. Angrel strode through with guards at his sides, discussing supply shipments and detention schedules as casually as if he were planning a banquet. Malgus watched from a shadowed archway down the hall. He had no official reason to be there. He had simply chosen to be. Elena, against his orders, lingered nearby, her cloak drawn tight, her eyes uneasy. "Why are we here?" she whispered. Malgus did not answer. His attention was on the corridor ceiling, where a maintenance panel had been loosened. A figure dropped. It happened fast. Too fast for most eyes, but not for Sith. A hooded assassin fell like a stone, vibradagger aimed for Angrel's throat. The attacker's movement was efficient, practiced, the kind of leap that came from someone trained not in honor but in killing. Angrel's guards reacted. Blasters raised. A shout. But the assassin was already within reach. Angrel's eyes widened in surprise more than fear. He had begun to believe himself untouchable. He threw up a hand. The force slammed outward, catching the assassin midair and flinging them into the wall. Bone cracked. The vibradagger clattered to the floor. Angrel stalked forward, face twisted with rage. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The assassin coughed blood. Their hood slipped, revealing a face marked with scars, and a brand that suggested old Imperial service, not Republic. Angrel's fury sharpened. "One of ours," he hissed. "Treason." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Malgus remained still, watching. Angrel lifted the assassin with the force, holding them against the wall as if pinning a moth. "Tell me," he growled, "or I will peel your mind open." The assassin laughed, blood bubbling on their lips. "You're not the only one. Who wants Coruscant?" they rasped. Angrel's eyes narrowed. "Barriss," he snarled. Malgus's gaze flickered. Barriss would deny it, of course. Barriss always preferred knives that left no fingerprints. Yet, the attempt was almost too obvious, too clumsy. It smelled like provocation, like someone trying to plant suspicion. Angrel's saber ignited. "Then you die," he said. He did not hesitate. The red blade flashed, and the assassin's head rolled, striking the polished stone with a dull sound. For a moment, the corridor was silent except for the faint hiss of Angrel's saber and the distant hum of Coruscant's occupied machinery. Then voices rose, guards shouting orders, courtiers whispering, fear blooming like mold. Someone would run to Barriss with accusations. Someone would run to the Dark Council with stories. Someone would turn this into a weapon. Angrel turned slowly, eyes sweeping the corridor. They landed on Malgus. "You," Angrel said, voice sharp. "Did you see who?" Malgus stepped forward. His presence calmed the hall in a way Angrel's fury never could. "I saw," he said. "Enough." Angrel's nostrils flared. "Enough for what?" "Enough to know you're becoming predictable," Malgus replied. Tone almost mild. Angrel's face darkened. "Careful," he warned. Malgus's gaze was steady. "If your rivals want you dead," he said, It's because you're standing where they want to stand. This is not about justice. It's about ownership. Angrel's saber deactivated. His hands clenched. Coruscant is mine, he snarled. Malgus tilted his head slightly. Then prove you can keep it, he said. Angrel's eyes narrowed, suspicion twisting. Are you threatening me? Malgus's mouth curved faintly. I'm reminding you, he said. Coruscant breaks the arrogant first. Angrel's jaw worked as if he wanted to strike Malgus and feared the consequences. He turned away abruptly, barking orders to his guards. As the commotion dispersed, Elena stepped closer to Malgus, her voice trembling. Was that planned? She whispered. Malgus did not answer immediately. He watched the blood on the stone, the way it seeped into the grout lines like ink into paper. No, he said finally, but it will be used. Elena shivered. Everything is used, she murmured. Malgus's gaze remained on the corridor. That is why the Empire endures, he said, and why the Republic will not. Yet even as he spoke, he felt the undercurrent beneath the palace intrigue, the pulse of something larger. The occupation was turning into more than politics. The spire the voice had demanded was rising in the Temple district. The force itself felt unsettled, as if Coruscant were becoming a stage for a ritual older than the war. And Malgus, for all his certainty, could not yet see the end of the play. The power node chamber lay deep beneath the Temple district, older than the Republic's current Senate, older than some of the towers that pierced Coruscant's smog. It had been built in an era when engineers still believed the city could be understood as a whole, mapped and maintained like a living organism. Now it felt like a crypt, cold metal, condensation on pipes, the faint hum of energy still pulsing through systems that refused to die. Satelle crouched beside an open panel, her fingers moving carefully through tangled wiring. She was not an engineer, but the force guided her hands, and the commando beside her murmured directions, pointing to conduits that controlled local shield relays and surveillance grids. If we can knock this node offline, the commando whispered, we create a blind spot, a corridor, enough to move people through without the patrols seeing. Aaron hovered nearby, tense as a drawn blade. And if we fail, she muttered, we light ourselves up like a beacon. Nost stood at the chamber entrance, saber lit, its blue glow muted by the oppressive dark. He listened intently, senses stretched. Above them, Coruscant's occupation machinery moved, boots on walkways, scanners sweeping the occasional bark of orders. Satelle felt a new presence in the chamber, and stiffened. A shadow detached from behind a thick pipe. A man stepped forward, holding a tool wrench like a weapon. Grease stained his clothes. His eyes were fierce with exhaustion. Jax. Aaron's saber snapped up instantly, green blade humming. Who are you? She demanded. Jax froze, eyes widening at the sight of Jedi. Then his expression hardened with anger. Does it matter? He hissed. You're here now. Took you long enough. Nay. Satelle lifted a hand, calming. We're not your enemy, she said softly. Jax's laugh was sharp. No, he spat. Where were you when the troopers dragged my neighbors out? Where were you when they shot a kid in Senate Plaza? Where were you? We were fighting, Aaron snapped back, voice raw. We were dying in that temple you're standing under. Jax flinched, the anger flickering into something like shame. He looked away. I didn't know, he muttered. He swallowed. I got a message. Told me to come here. Said there'd be people who wanted to hurt them back. No. Satella's eyes narrowed slightly. Who told you? Jax hesitated. He thought of Nira's calm eyes, the hollow of his sister. He thought of the trap. He didn't dare speak her name. No one, he lied. Satelle studied him, and Jax felt as if she could see through his skin. The force around her was not aggressive. It was simply honest. That honesty hurt. Before she could press further, Nost stiffened. His gaze snapped upward. Movement, he whispered. A faint red glow seeped into the chamber from the corridor. Searchlights. Footsteps. Imperial patrol. Everyone froze. Satella's fingers moved faster, pulling a cable free. The commando hissed, 2 minutes. Erin's grip tightened on her saber. Jax raised his wrench, breathing shallow. The troopers entered the corridor outside, their red lights sweeping. Voices echoed, distorted by metal. Signal drop detected, a trooper said. Search the maintenance routes. The chamber's door panel began to slide open. Nah stepped forward, saber raised. His expression was calm, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the stakes. Now, he murmured. Sattel yanked the final cable and slammed the panel shut. Sparks flew, bright and violent in the dark. The lights overhead flickered. The hum of the power node stuttered. The door opened fully, revealing troopers with blasters raised. For a heartbeat, both sides stared, occupied and occupier, faces hidden and faces bare. Nost moved first. His saber deflected the first blaster bolt with a snap of blue light. Erin lunged, green blade flashing. The commando fired, shots precise, aiming for joints and visors. Jack surged forward with a shout that surprised even himself. He swung his wrench at a trooper's helmet with all the pent-up rage of nights under curfew. The impact cracked plastoid. The trooper staggered, and Jack struck again, feral. Sattel rose, drawing her saber at last. Blue light filled the chamber like dawn. She moved through the chaos with controlled grace, not killing if she could avoid it, disarming, pushing, using the force to throw troopers back without crushing them. But restraint was costly. A Sith warrior appeared at the corridor's edge, drawn by the commotion, his presence sharp and cold. He ignited a red saber, and the chamber seemed to shrink around the color. Erin's eyes widened. "We don't have time," she hissed. Sattel felt the blind spot they had created beginning to fail. Above them, alarms would already be spreading like fire through Imperial channels. "Go," Sattel ordered, voice cutting through chaos. "Move." The commando grabbed a pack of data modules and darted toward a side tunnel. Nost and Erin followed, covering. Jax hesitated, breathing hard, staring at the trooper he had knocked down. The man lay groaning, alive. Jax's wrench trembled. He could finish it. He could make the Empire pay. Satella's voice snapped. "Jax!" He flinched, then ran. They plunged into the maintenance tunnel as blaster fire sizzled behind them. The power node chamber filled with smoke and sparks, and somewhere above, Coruscant's occupation tightened like a fist. In the dark, Sattel heard Jax's ragged breathing and realized, with a cold twist, that rebellion was already here, and that the Empire, through watchers and threats and traps, had been shaping it from the start. By dawn, the Spire had risen high enough to cast a shadow. It was not a monument built for beauty. It was a blade driven into the planet's flesh. The crater where the Jedi Temple had stood was now a construction site guarded by troopers and Sith alike. Heavy machinery hummed, lifting sections of black metal etched with runes that seemed to drink the surrounding light. Engineers worked with grim efficiency, their faces pale, avoiding eye contact with the acolytes chanting at the base. The chanting was not in basic. It was older, harsher, syllables that scraped at the mind. Satella, passing through a nearby tunnel, felt it like a migraine. It was the force twisted into a spiral, pulled tight around a central point. Malgus stood on a high platform overlooking the site, hands clasped behind his back, watching as the spire grew. The sight should have satisfied him, a symbol of Imperial power planted in the Republic's heart. Yet the force around it felt wrong in a way conquest did not explain. Elena lingered behind him, her face drawn. The chanting made her sway slightly, as if the air itself had become toxic. "What is it?" she whispered. Malgus did not answer at first. He had asked the same question of the acolytes. Their replies had been vague, reverent. The Emperor's will, the Emperor's design, the Emperor's future. He had demanded specifics. They had smiled, eyes shining, and said, "You will see." Malgus hated mysteries that were not his. He watched a section of the spire lock into place with a deep, resonant clang that seemed to vibrate through the city's bones. The rune lines pulsed faintly, like veins. An acolyte approached, head bowed. "My lord," the acolyte said, voice trembling with excitement. "The focus is nearly complete." Malgus's eyes narrowed. "Focus," he repeated. "For what?" The acolyte looked up, and Malgus saw something in the man's expression that unsettled him. Devotion so complete it bordered on madness. "For the opening," the acolyte whispered. Malgus's jaw tightened. "Speak plainly." The acolyte swallowed, then said, "For the Emperor's sight, for the Emperor's hunger." Elena's breath caught. Malgus's gaze snapped to her, then back to the spire. Hunger. The word made something cold stir in him. He had felt the Emperor's presence before. Vast, distant, like a storm on the horizon. He had always assumed the Emperor's ambitions were political. Galactic domination, Sith supremacy. But hunger was not political. Hunger was elemental. "What will it do?" Malgus demanded. The acolyte's smile widened. "It will make Coruscant receptive," he said. "It will make the city sing." Malgus's hand clenched behind his back. He could feel the force in Coruscant already. Millions of lives, thoughts, fears, hopes. A city that large was a chorus. The spire felt like something meant to conduct that chorus into a single note. A note that could be consumed. Elena stepped closer to Malgus, her voice trembling. "This wasn't what you wanted," she whispered. Malgus's expression hardened. "It is what the Emperor wants," he said, and the admission tasted like iron. Elena's eyes filled. "And if the Emperor wants to kill them all?" she whispered. Malgus stared at the spire, at the acolytes chanting like priests around a sacrificial altar. He thought of Coruscant citizens packed in Senate Plaza Dort. He thought of the undercity workers who had never mattered to the Senate, and now mattered even less to the Empire. He thought of victory and realized, with sudden clarity, that he was not holding Coruscant for himself. He was holding it for a predator older than any council. Malgus turned sharply to the acolyte. "Tell the voice," he said, voice low and dangerous, "that I will hold Coruscant, but I will not be surprised. If the Emperor intends to consume this world, I want to know when." The acolyte bowed deeply. "As you command," he whispered. But Malgus could hear the unspoken. "You do not command the Emperor." As the acolyte hurried away, Elena grabbed Malgus's arm, her fingers digging into his armor. "Malgus," she pleaded, "this is wrong." Malgus looked down at her hand, then at her face. For a moment, he saw her as she truly was. Someone who had survived slavery only to find herself chained to a different kind of monster. He gently removed her hand. "Wrongness is a luxury," he said, voice rough. "We live in what is." Elena's eyes squeezed shut. A tear slipped down her cheek, cutting a clean line through ash. Malgus turned back to the spire as it rose higher, rune light pulsing like a heartbeat. He watched, jaw clenched, and told himself he could still control this. He told himself he could still bend the Emperor's plan to his own ends. But in the Force, Coruscant's chorus shifted, and the note the spire began to draw out was not a note of triumph. It was a note of dread. The riot began with bread. It always did, in one form or another. The Empire's ration schedules were efficient but cruel, designed to keep people alive without allowing them comfort. Comfort bred complacency, and complacency bred the illusion of choice. Better to keep a city hungry enough to be obedient, but not hungry enough to be desperate, at least. That was the theory. On the 5th day, a shipment to the lower levels was delayed. A line of citizens waited for hours under watchful troopers. The troopers grew impatient. The citizens grew angry. Someone shouted. Someone shoved. A blaster butt struck a woman's face. Blood hit the ground, and the crowd broke. Jax had not planned to be there. He had been moving through tunnels, avoiding patrols, trying to contact others who still believed in resistance. He had also been reporting, carefully, selectively, to Nira, feeding her just enough truth to keep his sister safe. He hated himself for it. He told himself it was temporary. Then he saw the woman fall, and something inside him snapped cleanly. He pulled a mask up over his mouth, stepped onto a crate, and shouted, "No more!" The crowd turned toward him, startled. Faces looked up. Undercity workers, clerks, small merchants, people who had never thrown a punch in their lives. Their eyes were wide with fear, and the kind of hope that came from someone else being braver than they were. Jax's heart hammered. He could feel the Empire's guns in the air like a weight. "They took our city," he shouted, voice raw. "They took our food. They took our families. And we're standing here like good little citizens waiting for permission to live." A roar rose from the crowd, ragged, hungry. Troopers advanced, shields raised, forming a line like spear infantry. Their commander shouted orders. "Disperse! This is an illegal gathering." Jax's throat burned. He shouted back, "We are Coruscant!" The chant caught, spreading. "Coruscant! Coruscant!" Somewhere above, a hollow screen flickered on, broadcasting a message from the Senate Tower. Lysa's face appeared, pale behind her bars, eyes burning. The Empire had forced her to speak again. Another plea for calm, another warning against insurgency. But Lysa's gaze met the camera, and for a heartbeat the mask slipped. Her voice, amplified across the street, trembled with something dangerous. "Do not forget who you are," she said. "Do not." The feed cut abruptly, replaced by Imperial static. The crowd hissed, enraged. On a balcony above the street, Nira watched, her expression unreadable. A comm device rested in her hand. She had predicted this. She had shaped it. Yet watching anger become a living thing still held fascination. "Containment teams," she murmured into her comm. "Move in. Do not kill the leader unless necessary. I want him alive." She did not say Jax's name. She did not need to. In the crowd, Sattel moved like a whisper of calm through chaos. She had come because she felt the unrest building, the force around the city tightening. She saw troopers raising blasters. She saw citizens picking up broken crates and pipes as weapons. She felt the moment tipping toward massacre. She pushed forward until she could see the masked man shouting from the crate. She recognized him instantly from the power node chamber. Jax, the worker dragged into rebellion. The man already tangled in a watcher's net. Sattel reached him just as the trooper line surged. Blaster bolts sizzled. A citizen screamed. Someone fell. The crowd panicked, then surged back with feral momentum, throwing debris, swinging improvised weapons. The street became a crush of bodies and fear. Jax leapt down from the crate and slammed into a trooper with his shoulder, wrench in hand. The impact knocked the trooper back, shield clattering. Jax swung, striking Plastid with a hollow thud. The trooper stumbled. Then a blaster bolt caught a man beside Jax in the chest. The man dropped, eyes wide, mouth open, dead before he hit the ground. The crowd screamed. Jax froze, the death hitting him like a slap. This was what rebellion meant. Not slogans, not chants. Corpses. Sattel grabbed his arm, yanking him back into an alley. He spun, wrench raised, eyes wild behind his mask. "Stop," Sattel hissed. "You're going to get them all killed." Jax ripped his arm free. "They're killing us anyway," he snarled. Satella's eyes flashed. "Not if you live long enough to choose where you fight," she said. Jax hesitated, chest heaving. Behind them the riot roared, troopers firing, citizens screaming. Overhead, drones buzzed, recording everything, turning it into propaganda. Satella's voice softened, urgent. "Someone is steering this," she said. "Someone wants you to be seen, wants you to be a symbol." Jax's breath hitched. He thought of Nira's calm eyes, the hollow of his sister. Satel saw the realization dawn in his gaze. "Who?" he whispered, voice cracking. Before Satel could answer, a stun bolt struck the alley wall near them, sizzling. Troopers were closing in, flanking. Satel cursed under her breath. "Move," she ordered. They ran, slipping deeper into the city's veins as the riot continued above. Nira watched from her balcony, eyes narrowed, calculating. Liza's cut-off broadcast played in her mind like a forbidden prayer. And in the Force, Coruscant's chorus rose louder, angrier, feeding the Spire's hungry pull. The prison wing of the Senate Tower had once been a ceremonial archive space, sealed rooms where sensitive documents were stored, accessible only by layered authorizations. Angrel had repurposed it within a day, turning knowledge vaults into cells. It was fitting in a way. The Republic's secrets now served as walls. Satel moved through the corridor with Aaron at her side, sabers unlit, steps silent. 2 commandos had helped them breach a service door and then vanished to create a diversion elsewhere. Now it was just the 2 Jedi, guided by stolen access codes and the Force's faint pull toward a living presence trapped behind bars. They reached the cell block and froze. Lysa stood behind a grate, her face pale in the dim emergency light. Her hair was disheveled. Her gown had been replaced by a plain prisoner's tunic, yet her posture remained stubbornly upright, as if she refused to let captivity change the shape of her spine. When she saw Satel, her eyes widened, disbelief breaking through exhaustion. "You came," she whispered. Satel stepped closer. "Quiet," she murmured, fingers already working at the lock panel. "We're getting you out." Liza's hands slid through the bars, gripping Saddle's wrists with desperate strength. "No," she whispered. "Not just me. There are others. Senators. Civilian leaders. There." Her voice cracked. "They're using us." Aaron's jaw tightened. "We know," she said. "We're here to stop it." Satel plugged a small slicer module into the panel. The lock hummed, resisting. Then the corridor's air shifted. A presence like a closing door. Satel's fingers stilled. Aaron's hand drifted toward her saber hilt. Liza's grip tightened, fear flaring. From the shadows at the far end of the corridor, Malgus stepped into the dim light. He did not ignite his saber. He did not shout. He simply appeared, and the space around him seemed to contract, as if the corridor itself recognized the weight of him. Satel straightened slowly, placing herself between Malgus and the cell. Aaron mirrored her, expression feral. Malgus's gaze moved over them with calm appraisal, then settled on Satel. "You're bold," he said softly. Satel's voice was steady. "You're a fool," she replied. Malgus's mouth twitched faintly. "Perhaps," he said. "Or perhaps I'm the only one who understands what this place means." Aaron's eyes flashed. "It means you killed my order," she hissed. Malgus's gaze slid to her. "You're still alive," he observed. "So your order is not as dead as you pretend." Aaron's saber ignited with a snap, green light filling the corridor. "Don't speak," she snarled. "Just die." Malgus did not move. His eyes stayed on Satel. "You brought civilians into this," he said. "A senator. You think you're saving your republic. You're only prolonging its suffering." Satel's fingers curled into fists. "You're holding Corasont in violation of your own treaty," she said. "You've turned the capital into a cage." Malgus stepped closer, boots silent on stone. "Treaties are tools," he replied. "The Republic taught the galaxy that lesson. You shouldn't be surprised when the Empire learns it better." Liza pressed against the bars, voice trembling. "Why?" she demanded, anger cutting through fear. "What do you want from us? From Coruscant?" Malgus's gaze flicked to her, and for a heartbeat Liza felt as if she were being weighed. "To end your illusion," he said. "That's all." Satel felt something shift at the edge of her senses, Elena's presence. She glanced up the staircase at the corridor's side and saw a figure half hidden there, watching with wide eyes. A woman. Not a Sith. Not a soldier. A person caught in the machinery. Malgus followed Satel's glance, and something in his expression tightened, quickly buried. Satel turned back. "You could end this now," she said quietly. "Withdraw. Let Corasont breathe. Whatever you think you're winning." Malgus's eyes darkened. "You don't understand," he said, and the faint edge in his voice was the first hint of something like frustration. "This is not only about conquest." Satella's skin prickled. "Then what is it about?" Malgus's gaze flickered toward the window slits where the spire's faint rune glow could be seen in the distance, pulsing like a dark star. "About opening," he said softly, as if tasting the word. Aaron's expression faltered. "Opening?" Malgus's jaw clenched. He did not elaborate. Sith did not share weakness, and admitting uncertainty was weakness. Instead, he lifted his hand slightly. The force pressed outward, not as an attack but as a warning. The air thickened, making it hard to breathe. "You will leave," he said, voice calm and absolute. Satel held his gaze. The corridor felt like a sword edge. She could sense the fight that would follow. Fast, brutal, likely fatal. Then she did something Malgus did not expect. She released the slicer module from the lock and stepped back from the cell. "Not yet," she said quietly. Aaron stared at her. "Satele." Satella's voice was low. "If we fight him here, we die here. And the prisoners die with us." Liza's eyes widened with horror. "You can't leave us." Satel met Liza's gaze, pain tightening her throat. "I will come back," she whispered. "I swear it." Malgus watched, expression unreadable, as if impressed by the restraint. "Wise," he said softly. "Painful, but wise." Aaron's saber trembled, anger boiling. She wanted to strike anyway, to let vengeance burn out in one bright moment. But she saw the calculation in Satel's eyes and forced herself, shaking, to extinguish her blade. The corridor fell into dim red light again, and the silence between enemies felt heavier than any shout. Satella backed away, pulling Aaron with her. "We go," she murmured. As they retreated, Malgus did not pursue. He simply stood there, a dark sentinel, letting them leave like a reminder. He could have killed them and chose not to. Or perhaps, Satel thought with cold dread, he needed them alive for something. At the staircase, Elena watched Satel with an expression that looked almost like pleading. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, two women on opposite sides of an empire, both trapped in different cages. Then Satel turned away, and the shadows swallowed them as they fled the tower. Behind bars, Lysa sank to her knees, fists clenched, swallowing despair like ash. And in the Temple district, the Spire pulsed, hungry, drawing Coruscant's chorus toward a note that no treaty could silence. Night returned to Coruscant with a strange quiet. Curfew had emptied the streets. The riot had been crushed, its leaders scattered or captured, its victims collected into anonymous piles and detention reports. The Empire moved through the city like a fever, hot, relentless, reshaping everything it touched. From the Senate Tower balcony, the skyline looked both familiar and alien. Coruscant's endless lights still glittered, but they now flickered under the shadow of Imperial warships hanging in the atmosphere like silent beasts. Searchlights swept the streets. Patrol routes glowed on hollow overlays. The city's heartbeat had been forced into a new rhythm. Malgus stood at the balcony's edge, cape stirring in the smoke-laden wind. Behind him, Angrel paced like a man unable to sit still in his own triumph. They slipped through the tower, Angrel snarled. "Jedi in our halls. Senators still alive when they should be broken. This is weakness." Malgus did not turn. "It is reality," he replied. Angrel's eyes burned. "I want their heads on spikes," he hissed. "I want every Jedi dragged into the plaza and executed. I want the city to stop whispering about resistance and start choking on fear." "No." Malgus's voice was quiet. "Fear is useful," he said. But too much fear becomes desperation. Desperation becomes rebellion. Rebellion becomes costly. Angrel scoffed. Diplomat words, he spat. Malgus's jaw tightened. Strategist words, he corrected. Angrel stepped closer, lowering his voice. You undermined me, he said. You speak to the council behind my back. You let enemies live. Do not forget, he hissed. I am governor here. Malgus finally turned. His eyes were calm, and that calm made Angrel's fury look childish. You are provisional governor, Malgus said. Provisional, a word that means temporary. Angrel's face flushed with rage. Are you threatening me? Malgus's gaze was steady. I am stating a truth, he said. Coruscant is not held by titles. It is held by control. I control orbit. I control orbit. I control the quarantine. I control whether the city is sealed or open. Angrel's hands clenched. For a moment, Malgus thought Angrel might draw his saber. He almost hoped he would. Angrel's death would simplify many things. Instead, Angrel's gaze flicked past Malgus toward the distant glow of the temple district. The Spire. It rose above the ruins like a curse made metal, rune lines pulsing faintly red in the night. Even from here, Malgus could feel it in the Force. A tightening, a gathering, as if Coruscant's life was being coaxed into a single thread. Angrel's expression shifted, triumph dimming into uneasy curiosity. What is that thing? He asked, and for the first time his tone held something like doubt. Malgus's jaw clenched. The Emperor's will, he said. Angrel scoffed, but the scoff was thinner now. And what does the Emperor want with a dead temple? He demanded. Malgus stared at the spire and felt the vast hunger in the Force stir, slow and patient. More than conquest, he said quietly. Behind them, Elena stood in the balcony's shadow. She had followed despite Malgus's earlier dismissal, drawn by a desperate need to see what he saw, to understand what he was becoming. Her eyes were wet, tears reflecting the city's lights. She watched Malgus's profile, the scars, the rigid set of his jaw, and wondered where the man she had believed in had gone. She wondered if he had ever truly existed. Below, Coruscant's streets were quiet, but quiet did not mean peaceful. In alleys and tunnels, people whispered. They hid weapons. They carved symbols into metal. They made plans. The Empire could occupy a city, but it could not occupy every thought at once. Malgus turned back to the skyline. The Republic will not accept this, Angrel muttered. They'll rally the core. They'll build fleets. They'll come. Malgus's voice was steady. Let them, he said. Every ship they build is a ship they cannot hide. Every ally they rally is an ally they must abandon later. Every resource they spend trying to reclaim Coruscant is a resource they cannot use elsewhere. And Angrel's lips curled. You want them to bleed. Malgus's gaze remained on the city. I want them to learn, he said. Angrel laughed softly, the sound sharp. Then we hold, he said. We hold until they break. Malgus did not answer immediately. He thought of Saddle's eyes in the corridor, unyielding. He thought of Erin's rage, volatile. He thought of Lysa behind bars, defiant. He thought of the undercity worker who had swung a wrench with the desperation of a starving man. Coruscant would not break quickly. It would resist, bleed, adapt. Holding it would be a war inside a war. And above it all, the spire pulsed, drawing the Force tighter. Malgus's voice was low, almost to himself. We hold, he agreed. Elena flinched at the words. She wanted to scream, to beg, to shake him until he remembered what compassion felt like. But she knew better than anyone that compassion, in the Empire, was a liability people exploited until it killed you. Angrel stepped away, satisfied, already thinking of new arrests and speeches and displays. He vanished into the tower's interior like a tyrant returning to his throne. Malgus stayed at the balcony edge, alone with the city. In the distance, a Republic ship broke through the atmosphere, small, fast, fleeing rather than fighting. It carried diplomats, perhaps, or fleeing senators, or civilians with enough wealth to buy an escape route. It climbed into the sky and vanished toward the stars, leaving Coruscant behind like a condemned prisoner. Malgus watched it go without expression. Somewhere in the lower levels, Jax moved through tunnels with Saddle's warning echoing in his head, and nearest threat hanging over his sister like a blade. Somewhere behind bars, Lysa whispered promises to senators she could not save yet. Somewhere in ruins, Jedi gathered what knowledge they could and swore the temple would not be the end. And beneath it all, Coruscant's chorus rose. Fear, anger, grief, stubborn hope, feeding the Spire's hungry pull. Malgus closed his eyes briefly and felt the galaxy shift. The capital had fallen, and this time it was not being returned. When he opened his eyes, the city's lights glittered like a sea of embers, and the long night of occupation had truly begun.